welcome back to episode 6, Lawrence. Can you believe it? Right. 6 of our podcast here at Lehman College, Leap into Business. And don't forget, our School of Business here at Lehman College is the only school of business at a public institution of higher education in either the Bronx or Westchester. And Lawrence, we have a great guest here today. Lawrence, you want to bring her in?
Sure. I'm going to bring in Abby Jo Sigal, who is here with us. This is going to be a great conversation, Sean.
Absolutely. And I'm excited for it.
I'm super excited for it. I hope Abby's super excited for it.
I'm thrilled. I am so thrilled. No, it's awesome to be here.
Excellent. And we can just jump right into it, right?
Yeah.
So, Abby, talk to us a little about, you have an extensive background in community and development and workforce initiatives. How does your formal education kind of get you in this space, and what inspired you to get in this space? Talk to us a little bit about that.
I think it's my formal education and my informal education, and I always think that's super important to think about in the context of how we all learn and live our lives. So my formal education gave me a lot of advantages to look at things, but I could have gone around and done it with blinders on. But one of the things that I always paid attention to is where I was, what was happening, really trying to understand what was going on. One of the best formal education classes I had was with a fantastic urban designer, Alan Jacobs, and the class was literally, we would walk a neighborhood on Friday afternoons and try to understand what was happening in that neighborhood just by looking. And then we would go back and research and try to understand from the numbers what was happening. And that was just, a huge piece of the, for me, understanding of, you can look at numbers, you can look at data, but you really have to look and see with your eyes, talk to people to understand what's needed and what's happening in communities.
But you also have a degree in philosophy. Talk to me about how doing that in philosophy, because I feel like there's something, philosophy gives you a different kind of thing that, when you're going around looking at different communities. Talk to me about if you think philosophy actually played a role in that as well.
Yeah, certainly it did. I think philosophy helps you think about how you think and how people make decisions. But I also study the type of philosophy of what makes community, what makes places, what makes political systems, and that is the elements of a community. And so it just gives you a set of skills and tools that work in every industry or profession. And I just feel fortunate that I was able to do that. And continue to have the career that I have now and I have had. But it gave a great foundation, great basis.
Excellent. Excellent.
And excellent point there, Abby, right? Because right now, there has been this sort of push against doing undergraduate degrees that aren't science, engineering, or other sort of hard sciences like that. So having that background and then having you add some context to that really is quite helpful, I think.
1,000%.
And so, adding on to that, right, obviously, there has been quite a lot going on lately, right? Pre-COVID, during COVID, post-COVID. And the job landscape here in the city has changed quite a bit, right? And so how are you observing that, seeing that, and then trying to navigate that now and going forward?
Yeah, I think one thing about New York City is we are a city of diversity and constant change. And so it's a question of how do we adapt, and how do we adapt not just individually, but how do we adapt our institutions to really not look at today, but also look at tomorrow. So I think one thing that happened with the pandemic and what we've seen is sort of the pace of change has increased, which requires all of us to think on our feet and to move quickly, and to do so not unilaterally, but in partnership. And so as we see the changes in the landscape, and many of the studies say that with the growth of AI, we're not going to see fewer jobs, we're going to see more jobs, but they're different types of jobs, and the skills required for those jobs are different, and how that plays out is going to be important. So it's going to be really the difference between people who can use AI and use it to make themselves bionic in their occupations, and then those who can't. And so one of the big concerns we have is making sure that everybody in New York City is able to use AI and become bionic at their jobs, whatever that occupation may be.
Can we steal the bionic thing?
Absolutely.
It's all yours.
Absolutely.
It's all,
Absolutely.
My motto is if I say something and it shows up in other places, that's success. So I'm all for it.
And so to that point, bringing AI to everybody, right? Having current students, current employees, and employers understand how to use AI I think ties directly back to your earlier anecdote of going out into neighborhoods, observing it, then going back to the classroom and then trying to match the numbers to the actuality, right? So in that sense, the applications might change, be it AI, blockchain, crypto, items like that.
You're going to tell me how that works after the session.
Yeah,
Okay, good.
after the podcast. But that sort of bringing
Right.
both that real life and the classroom never really changes.
Yeah, I mean, and we're lucky. We're in New York City.
Yeah.
New York
Right.
City is the best possible classroom. I mean, there's no place like it. So, to go to a school like Lehman in the city and be able to use the city and have an institution like this business school really focus on the city as a classroom, that's unbelievable, unmatched anywhere. It's so amazing.
Yeah. And I also wanted to build on that too, which is really interesting. You talked about how diverse New York is, right? I would talk about how you're dealing with the diversity of generations too. So when you talk about AI and like these, my generation before, how do they grapple with, this changing landscape? So how does your office kind of tackle that as well?
That's so interesting. I'm a firm believer that making sure my team, and everybody I know has a growth mindset is super important. And I think that's intergenerational. It's coming in and having a growth mindset and saying, I'm constant learning. I'm going to learn from the people around me. Particularly want to learn from young people and how they're experiencing and what they're learning, and making sure we're instilling that growth mindset. And I think the best way to do that is to be the adult with the growth mindset. And then for us in our office, and I recommend everyone do this, we make a point of having young people working in our office. So we always have interns. We right now have two.
Some of the audience, right?
Yes,
here today.
We have. She should be the next person on your podcast. And we really have youth apprentices because it's their lived experience, which is our future. And so making sure we're learning from them as they're learning from us is how we think about it and how we tackle it.
Excellent.
And so, having that interaction, learning from each other is always good. But for any recent graduates who are right now listening to this podcast, are there any 2 or 3 tidbits, nuggets of wisdom, or areas that you would encourage them to focus on to navigate, AI and dealing with all of those changes?
Yes. So a few things. One is I think it's super important to really understand what interests you, because I think if you have a passion and interest, that helps drive you to learn more about how you can translate that passion or interest into a profession that is a living wage that enables you to have a choice-filled life. So really spending the time, and you might have figured it out when you were in high school. You may have figured it out when you're in college. You might not figure it out until you're 40 years old or 50 years old. That's okay, and it might change. But really sort of making sure you're thinking about what are my interests, and you're trying things to see what the different things are. Super important. I think the second thing I would really recommend is so often, we talk about education as what you know, and then increasingly with Google, because everybody can know what, you just look it up on Google, and as long as AI doesn't mess up Google, we'll be okay.
Well,
you can find out. That's another conversation. And then we've been spending a little bit more time sort of talking about how you learn and how to know. But so important is who you know. And there's been a lot of studies. Julia Fisher Freeman from the Christensen Institution has done a lot on professional networks, and it's the weak ties in your professional network, so people you might have just been introduced to, that often open up career opportunities. So I would say build that professional network, and folks are really receptive to doing informational interviews. So if there's someone out there, whether it's LinkedIn or person one away, making sure you reach out and say, I just want to learn about you, about what you're doing, and who knows where that can go. So that would be my second piece of advice.
I think there's so
Excellent
much
stuff
value.
there.
I think there's so much value in that we overlook. That just asking a question, you're not imposing on the person giving you a job, but just to say, how does it work in your environment? How does this whole thing work? Almost like this shadowing kind of thing, and I think that's important.
Yeah, and there's some schools. One, I think Gutman actually pioneered this. The CUNY Community College. They have a course called Ethnographies of Work, where they actually have students go in. They learn about becoming an ethnographer, and they actually go into industry and ask all the questions of what it's like. And what we taught when I was definitely like, this is what we all should be doing, because first of all, when the industry folks, and this was they were doing a seminar, and it was Wall Street traders, like getting Wall Street trader off the trading floor at 2:00 in the afternoon doesn't usually happen.
Right.
They were there talking about this because not only having the students ask questions, they were sort of in the power position, which I think is super important for students to feel that way when they're talking to industry professionals. But it also made the industry folks really ask questions themselves, like, what's important? Why am I here? Why do I do this?
Exactly.
And so it became this very valuable on both sides opportunity.
Right. No, I love that.
I think having that opportunity to ask questions and to just meet people, Lawrence, right,
And to
your
get credit
point,
for it.
and to get credit, and to get credit for it, ideally. But having that can also sort of break down some of those walls and barriers and the auras that do exist around Wall Street or big financial institutions here that can be otherwise hard to overcome.
Right. No, I agree with that. Abby, we had an opportunity to talk before the podcast just about public and private, and you have an extensive career in public and private partnerships, and that's big for you. We're trying to figure that out as a business school, right? How do these collaborations contribute to workforce development? And what successful partnerships, if you can name one that maybe something recently like this is how we put this together? Because I think that can be a struggle at a public institution, how to put those partners together.
Yeah, so you can't do talent and workforce development without public-private partnerships, because most people work for private companies. And even, frankly, when they work for public sector institutions, we treat our public sector institutions as employers, and so very much seems like a public-private partnership because they have the same interests and needs in terms of making sure they have strong talent to fulfill their mission or business priorities. So it is sort of bread and butter. You can't do it without. And then I also come from a background where I was doing a lot in affordable housing, and one of the ways we were able to scale affordable housing here in the Bronx, as well as throughout the city, as well as throughout the country, is through a policy mechanism that encouraged public-private partnership through low-income housing tax credits. And what was key to all of this and all of public is like really finding out what are the aligned interests and making sure the incentives are aligned. And so I think as we're trying to expand public-private partnership in opportunities such as really expanding apprenticeship, so meeting the mayor's moonshot goal of 30,000 apprenticeships by 2030, it's really understanding how do we make sure we're looking at the job seeker or student or apprentice's best interest and what they need, how to make sure we're looking at what the industry needs in terms of their occupation, in terms of today's needs as well as future growth, and then aligning it with the institutions, whether it's the educational institutions or the nonprofits that need to support. And if we can get all those incentives aligned, and sometimes it can happen with policy, sometimes outside policy, then that really works well.
That sounds like it can keep you up at night, Abby.
Well, it's complicated, but a city like New York doesn't work without public-private partnerships because we need to have everybody rowing in a similar direction if we want to have the inclusive economy and the shared prosperity. I mean, we're a city that's created more wealth than any place in the history of time, and we need to make sure that wealth does not just accrue to a few, but really benefits everybody, and not just benefits everybody, that everybody feels like they're contributing to it. Like, I am part of this incredible project. So, we work with industries. I was talking a little bit earlier. We worked with a bunch of through our healthcare industry partnership. We worked with a bunch of the hospitals, both public health and hospitals as well as private hospitals. One of the challenges they were having was retaining their first-year nurses because once they hit the floor, it was very challenging. So, worked with them to develop a nurse residency program that markedly increased retention for first-year nurses, and this was even through the pandemic. And that was because we created a cohort model, an apprenticeship model, and so folks could support each other, and they could really understand and not just support their peers, but also have mentoring programs of nurses who had been on the floor for a long time. So it's work like that that really makes the city thrive. It also has positive benefits in terms of ROI. Our partner with Health and Hospitals, and I was just telling Dean Hurley this, she came up at our press announcement last year when we were talking about the nurse residency partnership and how successful it was, that it had saved health and hospitals $50 million in just a few years.
Wow.
And so that accrues to being able to do better
absolutely.
for their customers, for the patients.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow.
That's good.
That's
stuff.
impressive. So that whole concept, right, PPP, right, kind of strikes me as kind of similar to this idea known as impact investing. But how is that defined at your viewpoint? And then how is that going, basically, right? Because it's always easy to talk about, public-private partnerships, but obviously, trying to mix public corporations and public institutions can always be challenging. So one, how is that framed, right, in your context? And two, really, how is that creating jobs and other opportunities outside of the cost savings and items like that?
Yeah, so I mean, impact investing, I think that the term was coined probably about 20 years ago. I would argue there's been a long history of impact investing, particularly through capital markets. For instance, the tax credit for low-income housing, that was part of a federal act in 1982, and that was impact investing. It was just a tax execution rather than a cash execution. That said, I'm super excited about impact investing because it's really framed that you need to use your dollars to not just make money, but also to do good. So it's either double or triple bottom line. And so I think really measuring those positive externalities is super important because when I make choices about who I'm going to do business with, who I'm going to work for, I can look at that and say, I want to have an entity that's really thinking about these double and triple bottom lines. I also think that if we really want to get to scale on this, we're going to have to start making sure we're measuring the negative externalities, so the cost of not doing well. And I feel like some of that's coming out in the conversations around climate change and climate resiliency in terms of, believe it or not, the risk analysis that investors are making or companies are making, and they now have to disclose it in some of their financial reports. And as we sort of lift up those negative externalities and figure out who's paying for that, we'll see more folks going into impact investing because it's a smart choice.
Right.
No,
Wow.
and if you measure something, then it's always going to get managed, right? And so having the conversation around impact investing on the direct positives, but also to your point, those externalities of actually not doing it, not taking action, right? Because those externalities impact all of us.
Yeah, and I think it gives the stakeholders that are involved in that, it gives them an idea of like, why am I doing this? Why am I doing and it also forces another conversation about, can we do something a little bit different if the negative impact is just greater than the positive impact? So I love that.
So, Sean, you're doing accounting, right? I mean, there's a whole conversation around the sustainable...
Oh, no, don't tell them that. I'm trying to be the cool podcast guy here. Don't tell them I do accounting.
But there's a whole movement to have the Sustainable Accounting Board, which is super exciting. Like, if that became the lay of the land, that would be transformative. And we're already starting to see it.
Yeah, absolutely. There was the IIRC, SASB, and actually...
now this is where Sean gets me
Sorry,
lost.
guys.
This is where Sean gets me lost, and he knows I'm struggling
whole
right
PhD actually was on integrated financial statements.
Oh, amazing.
So, all right. Done. Lawrence, back to you.
This is good stuff. You actually answered a lot of our questions. I'm gonna pivot just a tiny bit because as the executive director of the mayor's workforce development, what's your North Star, though, Abby? I know you've done a lot, but what's your North Star? What do you see, when you walk away from this thing, like this is where I'm going?
So for me, it's public-private partnerships, sort of recognizing that we all need to work together to make sure we're hitting the citywide objectives when it comes to talent and workforce development, and that we're making significant progress and we're measuring it. So when I came into office in partnership with the mayor, we developed an executive order 22. There's now like 623. So it was one of the early ones.
It was 22, now it's 600.
Wow.
I think last time
you guys have been busy.
Yeah, no. But this one was particularly exciting because talent development and workforce and education had been really fragmented when it came to student career success or just New Yorker career success. And what we were trying to do is make clear that there's actual citywide objectives, and those are laid out in that executive order. And they're not rocket science, but I don't think they were ever made explicit before. And so some of the key things in it are making sure that all New Yorkers launch successfully into family-sustaining careers by the time they're 25. That seems like a no-brainer, right? We're all nodding our heads. I don't know of any place that's actually measuring against that. But imagine if the Federal Reserves of this country were actually looking at that on a regular basis and saying, this is showing the health and well-being of your state, your region, your city. It's also very much looking at if you're working, making sure it's living wage jobs. We have too many people working in 2 jobs and wages. Yeah. That's a challenge. It's a structural challenge. It's not going to get solved all overnight, but we need to be working doggedly to make that clear.
So this sounds like an index, right, Abby?
It's not quite. So it's just laying them down. But yeah,
right, it sounds
the
like
Lehman index on the city's well-being. I love it.
I like
that. Hey, Dean. All right, we're doing that.
but you see what I'm saying? It's like this
sure.
index that you continue to measure. Say, okay, are we doing this right? We're not doing this right. Okay, how do we raise this?
Right.
So that's what it sounds.
And it gets into a whole lot of data collection and challenges that we are not there yet. But we got to. You said North Star, so I'm talking about. And then it's also looking at the disparities. So we have a city of too many disparities, and they're not just. They're historic and they're structural and they need to change. So we've been able under this administration to work with many folks as well as having a good economy to reduce some of the disparities. So recently the mayor announced that Black and Latino unemployment has gone down 30% since his administration. But it's still 2 or 3 times the white unemployment rate. So we got to constantly look at those numbers.
I love that, the way you frame that.
So really, because and we know that it's concentrated in particular communities and in particular places. So one of the things we've been doing, we just came off of 5 months where we did hiring halls in partnership with our city agencies and private employers and training institutions. We were doing hiring halls in every borough once a month in the lowest in the zip codes that had the highest unemployment. So we did that because we should be doing that. We should be meeting people where they are, but also to make sure we're learning and really understanding what are some of these structural issues that really need to be tackled.
And that right there is a great example of the public sector, government agencies actually taking direct action to help solve problems in a proactive way, which, might come as a surprise here, that isn't always how the government agencies are always thought of, right? And so having those kind of concrete examples, actions in partnership with the private sector is a really good way to really illustrate and to hammer home those points that these items are being talked about, but there's action being taken too. Real action.
And again, our team's about action and doing things, and I would say that's true of our office, but it's true of the administration in general, and it should be true of any administration. So all of you hold any administration accountable to that. I think what we need action, but we also need, and I sort of say in this role you have to play chess and checkers at the same time. So checkers is that action and learning from it, but you have to have a chess game to go where we moving long term, because again. A lot of these issues are structural, and if we don't pick away and start to shift the structures, we're going to continue to have the same outcomes that we've always had.
Yeah. And so, adding on to that question, Lawrence, right? Sort of the North Star, so those bigger picture goals, right? Is there any one person or a group of people or a mentor of yours that really serves as a motivational figure or as a example that you want to emulate in your actions, which are many?
Yeah. I've been fortunate of having many mentors. So just talking about sustainable finance, Clara Miller, who is sort of the mother of impact investing in a lot of ways. One person who had a big impact on me. It's also, unusual folks. One time, I'm getting my hair cut, right? Everybody, how much have you learned sitting at the barbershop? Right?
Yeah.
So, this guy's I'm getting my hair cut in his kitchen because and shabby chic and he's talking to me and I'm like, he did a great haircut, but he's like, yeah, and he's starting his life coach business. I'm like, that's interesting, and it's like, whatever you put out in the world comes back to you.
Right.
And you know what? That's some of the most sage advice. It's
Yeah.
like what you put out in the world comes back.
Yeah.
So really, another mentor who I worked for really highlighted people's strengths are their weaknesses. So that was another sort of lens that I look at people because sometimes your strength is exactly what's needed in the moment, and sometimes it's exactly what gets in your way. So I just think that brings a lot of humility to myself as I think about what I do, but also when I'm working with colleagues in the team, like recognizing like they're really good at this, but sometimes it creates blind spots and sometimes it's not the best, and just helps in terms of professional development. And I guess the last thing I would say is I had a couple mentors when I was doing community development and affordable housing. And one of the things when I now look, and I sort of recommend to anybody I talk, when you are going to work for somebody or work, or someone's going to be your boss, look and try to understand where people who've worked for that person before are now. And you will note that there are some people.
That is an amazing.
There are
Can
some
you say
people.
Can you say that again?
Yeah.
Like that's really good. I think that's really good for people who are watching the podcast.
Yeah.
I think that is a very telling sign.
Yeah, so if you're going to work for somebody, really look at where folks who have worked for that person before, where are they now? And you will see that there are some folks where whole industries have worked for that person because they have really not only mentored that person and grown that person, they've created an environment of trust in that, and then the people go and pay that forward and bring it to other places. And that's, to me, something that's so critical because when you work, you're there a lot, and the people you're around are very important, and particularly the person you're working for.
Right. I also, maybe you can give some of our students who may be listening to us, how did you go about getting a mentor? I'll just share some inside information. My wife is an introvert, and I'm an introvert advocate. I call myself, I'm a super extrovert. Like, you can't stop me.
I love that. An
We haven't
introvert
noticed,
advocate.
though.
I love that. I love that.
I'm an
That's
introvert
awesome.
advocate because my
Yes.
wife is introverted,
Yeah.
and so I'm
Yeah.
always looking for the introverts in the room, and because they have so much power.
I love
right?
that.
They have so
Yes.
much power. But oftentimes, it's hard for them to find a mentor because they're always thinking all the time, does this person have enough time for me? Where me, I'm like, I'm infringing on time.
Yeah.
Like, I need you to be my mentor.
Yeah.
Like, you know, that kind of thing. Talk to me about how you, in earlier in your career, how do you go about finding that mentor? How do you do you spot them in a room? Do you go, okay, I think how do you navigate? How did you navigate that?
That's interesting. I love introvert advocate. Everybody, we need to make sure that's the case. For me, it was, again, back to your interests. Like, I was interested in something. I wanted to learn. I wanted to understand more about it. It was a little bit based on that than necessarily if it was somebody who looked like me or had my lived experience. It's because they really were digging deep into something I cared about. And so I've continued to try to do that, and I've just been very fortunate that I've been able to sort of pick up those kind of mentors all along the way.
Now, further in your career, you get here, and I know Sean and I and we've all done this. Have you seen people that need mentors, and you're like, I'm going to tap this person? Like, I've done that with students where I'm just like, stop by my office, because you can feel that need. Have you seen that, and how have you seen it? I mean, I know you have a busy life.
No, I think it's always important to make time for people. I think one of the, people's strengths are their weaknesses, city strengths are the weaknesses. One thing New York City is about being busy. I'm busy. It's a culture of busyness.
Right.
And sometimes that culture of busyness means we don't sort of stop and take the time and talk to people and notice what's happening. And so fantastic that you do. So I try to do that. I'm probably not, now I'm going to go back and be more intentional about it. I'm probably not as intentional about it because I'm probably a little bit like don't want to impose. But I do always try to make a point of having, trying to bring in young people up to my age, or even older, bring them to the table and have the conversation. Because I think it's so important, and frankly, I learned so much. And it really helps our team do a better job.
I agree. Well, we're at that point. We are at that point. Our last and final question. There are 3 metaphorical bones in business. There's your backbone, which is your decision. We always get people nervous during this question.
I know. They always seize up. I can feel it sitting next to them.
Right? There's your backbone, which is your decision making. There's your wishbone, which is your kind of your luck, your serendipity, and then there's your humor. Which is your sense of humor, and then there's your business bone. Which business bone we know you use all three? We know you use your backbone, your wishbone, and your. Why am I getting the bones mixed up, Sean? Backbone.
Wishbone,
and funny
humor
bone,
bone,
and
funny bone,
and funny bone. So we know you use all three, but which one are you most comfortable with? And explain that, and for what reason?
I really want to say like the funny bone, like I'm the person but no, for me, this was a tough one. I've also thrown out my back a few times, so I know a little better than to just depend on my backbone, because sometimes it cannot always serve me well because. But it's good to have a backbone.
Yes.
Like you certainly don't want to not have one. And then wishbone, I feel very privileged. I've been very fortunate in life. But I often there's so many people who are born in third base and think they hit a home run, and that's always a challenge. Like people should know that people start in different places. I wanted to answer this question by not answering the question. To me, it's your head and your heart. Like it's your heart. Like you have to have both. And if you're too much in your head, you miss things. And if you're too much in your heart, you miss things. And so it's really bringing that together, because your heart's what makes you human, and people in your head's what makes you thoughtful and not doing this, and really trying to get to that North Star in some ways. So. Again, I really want to be the person who's like the funny bone. I'm the funniest in the room. I'm going to get there, but my impersonations are terrible.
But Abby, do you feel like your sense of humor drives, like, on a day-to-day basis? What do you feel like?
You have to ask my team that.
Like, what do you?
No, I think joy and humor is super important in a workplace.
We know your backbone, your decision making. Your career shows that, so
Yeah.
we know that. But I guess the question is really like, because we know you use all three bones. It really is like, when you're going through, what do you fall back on? Like, you know what, today was a long day, but I can't make, that, for me, that's like my funny bone. It's like, I can find some funniness out of something that happened that was a really hard day. So I was looking to see, like, which bone do you depend on when things get tough?
When things get tough.
Making her answer this.
I have to.
Lawrence, you're really drilling
I
that.
have to.
Yeah.
No comments.
Have you guys answered this question?
Absolutely not.
I'm the one that came up with the question. I've thought about it many times. So, funny bone is always mine. I always depend on my sense of humor.
Yeah.
I always kind of look at it like, okay, it can get better tomorrow. My decision making, I would probably say, is not my strongest bone, because I'm so I can let emotional decisions, like I'm passionate about this, I'm passionate about that. So I always need somebody that has a better analytical, like, okay, this is what the budget looks like. When I got into education, I didn't realize how grants work. So like, if we did all this great work and it's like, oh, it's over in 3 years, I'd be like, why? And like, well, that's the way grants work. I was like, why? And so that.
But you got to keep that why.
I know.
Like, come on, I'm doing good work. Why?
Dean will ask you, like, we're always asking why, right? And so my funny bone is that bone that just is like, okay, we had a tough day.
Yeah.
We're okay. Let's get right back at it. And so for me, that's what it is.
And Sean, you're really not.
Thank you,
Thank
you.
Tune in next time for my
answer. Thank you for putting him on the spot, Abby. Let's hear it. And he's an accountant.
So I would say definitely backbone first.
I know.
Budgets, analytics, that's my thing. But I always try to joke around.
Yeah.
Right? Because ultimately, it isn't always that serious, right? And there's always an opportunity to usually fix it tomorrow.
Yeah.
So backbone first, funny bone, and then wishbone every so often.
Yeah, I think wishbone. Me, it's big wishbone. Yeah.
Well, I think so much of what I do is about relationships and connections, and to me, it probably sits more squarely in the funny bone, and a little bit of the serendipity. Like like if you can connect dots, you can really make change happen, and so that's sort of a critical piece of this work. So, but again, your heart's got to be in it.
Yeah, excellent.
All right.
Excellent.
So, Lawrence, do we have any more questions?
No.
Or do you have any more questions for us?
Oh well, I'm just starting.
Turning the tables now for the second half.
No, this was good, Abby. Thank you for making time.
Oh no, thank you. This is fantastic. I love this.
We did a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff that we're going to take your lead on, and thank you for helping us with that. So, Sean, we did it again.
Yeah, we did it again.
Yeah.
6 episodes.
Yeah, and
half a dozen.
They
haven't canceled us yet.
Yeah, they haven't asked us for rent money either. So
Yeah.
we're doing pretty good.
And,
All right.
and the syndication, you're now
Yeah,
going
yeah.
national. Okay, awesome.
All right, thank you,
All right,
Ed.
thank you
Thank you
so
so
much
much.
again.
Thank you. So appreciate it.
Here we go.